I'd like to explain why I decided to go in this direction, a month of Mussar. And I want to do this through quoting Rav Kook. Rav Kook was the first Ashkenazic chief rabbi of Jerusalem. And besides that, he was a visionary and a mystic. This first quote I want to share with you to give you some insight about why I feel that this work is so important and why it's the perfect work to take us into Elul, which we are now on the third day tonight. I actually quoted this at my smicha ceremony when I got ordination way back in 2012. This was part of my presentation. So this is the quote that inspired me from Rav Kook. Kol adam tzarich leda'at shekarui hi la'avod al pi ofen v'hachra v'hargasha hamiyuchud shelo al pi shoresh nishmato. So what does that mean? Kol adam tzarich leda'at. Every person needs to know that he or she, of course, is being called to serve in a way compatible with his or her unique aspirations and feelings, true to the core of his or her soul. You know, I'm always hocking you all the time. This is nothing new because I'm always talking about our unique roles, right? And when we say Modeh Ani, when we wake up in the morning, Reb Zalman of blessed memory always said, how do you want to Zalman me today? So each of us, we have this in our uniqueness, in our DNA, what we are supposed to be doing in this lifetime and how we're supposed to be serving. And if we get lost along the way, we do a little teshuvah, we do a little praying, we do a little talking with nature, we do whatever we can and using the spiritual tool chest to get back on track and to be gliding back into the record grooves which we all have. So continuing with Rav Kook, he teaches when one forgets the essence of one's soul, when one distracts their mind from attending to the substantive content of their own inner life, everything becomes confused and uncertain. The primary role of teshuvah, that's why I am quoting him, is for the person to return to their true selves, to the root of their soul. And lastly, we are now in the month of Elul, right? The 6th month of year, which precedes Tishrei, the 7th month. The beginning of the 7th month will be what? Rosh Hashanah. This is important preparation for Yamim Noraim, the days of awesomeness. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. This month is equivalent to the 6th day of the week in which we prepare for the blissful immersion into Shabbat. Similarly, now we are encouraged to use this month of Elul as a cleansing process so we can be our fullest selves in the presence of the divine and each other during Tishrei and always. We blow shofar daily to prod us to awakening. Similar to the temple bell in Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village, it's a wonderful sound, that is the shofar, bringing us back, bringing you back, bringing us all back to our true home. And so Mussar is one of those spiritual practices that can aid us in attaining that goal, which is bringing us back to our true home. It's pruning away, perhaps, that which has covered the light all of these years and hiding our essential self from ourselves and from others, and of course, essentially from God. So with that said, that's the reason why I chose this to be our month of Mussar, and I could not have been more happy when Mindy agreed to be brought out of retirement. Mindy is one of my dearest, oldest, she's not that old, friends, for whom I knew in past lifetimes. And we all have friends like that. And I'll leave it to you, Min, to share with everybody what your experience with and what we're going to be doing tonight as basically the kickoff. You know, I like to use sports analogies for this night. Hi, Devorah, and welcome. Eliana and Barb and Dan are here. We've got the whole mishpucha. And Mindy, what we like to do is welcome you with a good round of Moshe applause. All yours.
That was great. Thank you so much. I'm So honored to be here. So thank you for definitely getting me out of Mussar retirement, only as a teacher, not as a practitioner, because it is my spiritual practice. Barb and Dan, I don't know if you're willing to come on screen, but it would be great to see you if you're able to do that. Not everyone has that ability, but thank you. But I'd love to be able to see you, and then I feel like you're here with me. And the only other person that I know in this space is Sandy. We studied together for a number of years. And
I would say we studied together. You were my madricha for
well, students are always my teachers, so I would definitely call you my teacher. And it's really great to see you. And we live pretty close to each other, but I don't see you that often in the neighborhood, so it's nice to see you on screen. And welcome everybody. It's really nice to meet all of you. I am based in Philadelphia, and if you in the chat just because I won't take the time to do it except in the chat, can you say where you're calling in from and what drew you to this class? So just put that into the chat. That would be awesome. So I'll just say a few things about my background. And then I am going to, and also, if you do not have scrap paper near you, then definitely grab a piece of scrap paper and a pen or a pencil. So hopefully everyone has something and they don't need to leave. But if you need to like walk away, by all means do that and get what you need. Because I'll need you to have some paper and a pen to work with. Awesome. Okay. All right, there's 2 people, 3 people. Oh, LA. Okay.
Hi, Sheila. Welcome.
Okay, so if some other people want to just drop in the chat and say where you're calling in from. Oh, that's awesome, Mark. Scott says he does whatever you say. That is
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
really good. It's a lot of power. Okay. All right, let's see. Rachel is yet to be back, but I'm sure she'll be back in a moment. Okay, so a number of people from your local area, Mark. Awesome.
So FYI, Rachel is Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. Beautiful. Thank you. Oh, beautiful, Devorah. Okay. Okay, rural Kentucky. Kentucky is one of the 3 states I've not been to, and it is on my list for the fall. So nice to meet you, Eliana. Okay, so Rachel is not back, hopefully any moment now. Oh, and Sheila isn't there. Okay, I'm just going to say a little bit about my background while we're waiting for people to come back with their scrap paper and their pen or pencil. So I'm a longtime Jewish educator, and I started as a Hillel professional, and then I did some freelancing things, and I launched a program called Rosh Hodesh. It's a girl thing, which is a national program. And I started to study Mussar 21 years ago in 2003. So that's how long I've been studying Mussar. And somewhere after about 9 years, I taught it. And then I trained teachers and I supervised them. And 4 years ago, I decided I wanted to bring Mussar back as, well, it was always my spiritual practice, but I didn't want to teach anymore. I wanted to have it as my spiritual practice. And so I left teaching, and I'm an artist. I do paper cuts. There's one in my background. And I also teach another art form called Zentangle, which I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it is a mindfulness kind of drawing. And sometimes I combine Mussar with Zentangle, which is pretty awesome because I find them very complementary. But Mark, who is a longtime friend, as he mentioned, 35 years, but who's counting, asked me if I would teach. And I usually say no, but I can't say no to Mark. So I'm really honored to come and spend, about an hour with you talking about Mussar and doing a few experiential things related to Mussar. So the first thing that I would love for you to do on your piece of paper is I just want you to write down something that brings you joy. And there's no right or wrong, just note that. Okay, so, all right, so we're going to come back to that. I'm going to first start by talking about some history of Mussar. And some of you might not know anything about Mussar, and some of you have been practicing for a while. Some of you might have taken a class here or there, or even looked it up and done a little homework ahead of time. But I'm going to assume that no one knows anything, and I'm going to take it from there. So, and if you know some of this and you know more, then that's great. Really, Mussar is a lifelong practice. And so we have an hour. So I'm giving you like bullet points, and I will definitely miss a lot of the history. It's just really like an overview before we get into the experiential part of tonight. So Mussar literally means discipline or instruction. And it's a series of practices that brings insight into Jewish theology and an ethical analysis into our lives. It's a spiritual practice. It dates back to our Mussar texts, date back to the Bible. So it's not new at all. And some of you might have even studied Mussar texts without even realizing it, such as the Book of Proverbs or Pirkei Avot. Definitely a Mussar text on how to act ethically. Over the millennium, the past 1,000 years, texts have been written to help people refine their character development. And the thing about Mussar and character development is it isn't just a Jewish thing. It is in really every religious spiritual practice, this idea of character development. There are many texts. I'm going to talk about ones that are really relevant to the texts that are used through the Center for Contemporary Mussar. And that is really the school that I come out of here in Philadelphia, which was founded, well, the predecessor to it launching as the center was Rabbi Ira Stone teaching out of his congregation in Philly. And that's when I started in 2003. And then over time, it evolved into a nonprofit. But the Center for Contemporary Mussar is based on the work of Rabbi Israel Salanter, and we'll get there for a second. So in 1740, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto published a book called Mesilat Yesharim. And what was really interesting about, and this is like one of my favorite books ever, Jewish books, is that Chaim Luzzatto was born in Padua and grew up in Padua. And he also was not only rabbi, but he had secular education as well. But he was also a Kabbalist. And he came about 100 years after Shabbatai Tzvi. And those that know anything about Jewish history know that Shabbatai Tzvi was known as the false Messiah. And you can look him up if you don't know a lot about him. He was really a character who eventually converted to Islam but traumatized a lot of Jews from all over the world. And so Luzzatto, who was really, really brilliant, also scared the rabbis of Padua, and they basically ran him out of town because he said, I have this angel sitting on my shoulder telling me things. And they just thought that kind of smelled too much like Shabbatai Tzvi, and he went to Amsterdam and he had to promise that he wouldn't write anything or teach anybody. And he was a stone cutter, which is what Jews did, men who studied. and he eventually could not control himself, and he wrote this book in 1740. This book, Mesilat Yesharim. Okay. And then 3 years later, he went to Israel with his family, and sadly he died, and he's buried next to Rabbi Akiba, actually near Tiberias. And what's interesting about that is that he died at 40 and Rabbi Akiba started to learn at 40. So there's that nice kind of juxtaposition of their ages. Okay, so Mesilat Yesharim is a guide to becoming a pious person and focused on personal conduct. It can be a really difficult book. Rabbi Stone has his own commentary on the book that was published. I don't remember what year it was published, like maybe around 15 years ago or so, but it's based on the translation that Mordechai Kaplan did in the early 1900s. So while Rabbi Stone was actually doing his own comment, he was translating it when I was studying with him. JPS wanted to actually republish the original version they had published in Mordechai Kaplan. And Mordechai Kaplan was not a Mussarnik and did not want to have to translate this book. It took him 19 years and he did it kicking and screaming. So there's a lot of commentaries now on Mesilat Yesharim. When I started to study 20 years ago, there was only the Feldheim edition. Then there was the one that JPS put out, and now there's a whole bunch of other versions that have come out with some really amazing commentary. Okay, so that was 1740. In 1808, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Leffen published a book called Cheshbon HaNefesh. Now, Cheshbon HaNefesh is the language we use, literally meaning accounting of the soul, and that's something we do during Elul, and also during the 10 days specifically, is that we look into our soul and we think about, how can I change? You know, who can I apologize to? What wrongs can I make right? How can I be a better person? So he literally wrote a book called Cheshbon HaNefesh, and that is based on 18 Midot. But the book is actually based on a book by Benjamin Franklin called 13 Virtues, because Benjamin Franklin, and I really love this part of the story, because Benjamin Franklin, right, lived in Philadelphia and I live in Philadelphia. So there's like a local connection. And actually, Benjamin Franklin had a lot of issues. He was no saint, but he liked to act saintly and do saintly things. And he wrote this book, 13 Virtues, that Mendel of Leffen actually found in France. And he made it Jewish. So of course it's the number 18, not 13. And there were some midot in there. He didn't call them midot, Benjamin Franklin. They were called virtues that Menachem Mendel Leffen made more Jewish. Like, instead of chastity, which was one of them, it's modesty or tzniut. Okay, so he published this book in 1808, 1810. And then later on in the 19th century, along comes Rabbi Israel Salanter. Now, Rabbi Israel Salanter is really the founder of the Mussar movement, kind of as we know it today. He's really, the father of it. And he brought Mussar texts into his yeshivot in Lithuania. So his feeling was, okay, I have all these Mussar students. I have all these yeshiva students, and they are not necessarily nice people. And then there's all these Jews that have been affected by the Haskalah that aren't connected to Jewish texts. And he wanted everybody to be connected, to really work on their ethical behavior. And so he created this movement. And what he did was he had the yeshiva students study Midot. He had them study Mesilat Yesharim. He had them learn in Chavrutot in pairs. And they had to do a self-inventory and see how it is that they could do better. And they journaled about it. And that's something that Benjamin Franklin started, actually, was this accounting, this literal accounting every day, like a checkoff list. How did I do? What came up for me? How could I have done it better? And this continued on into to the Shoah, when all the yeshivot were decimated. But some people that had been studying in those yeshivot had moved to Israel. So the Mussar movement pretty much died. there was a little pocket in Israel, and no one knew much about it until really the turn of our century, like 2000, maybe a few years earlier than that, when both in the Orthodox world and in the throughout the denominations, people started to learn about Mussar, from Alan Marinas, who wrote his book Climbing Jacob's Ladder, and his book Everyday Holiness, and Rabbi Aristone, my teacher, who discovered Mussar in actually 1960s, before he went to rabbinical school, and continued to study it, and then he started to teach it 20 years ago. And even before that, he was teaching it some at JTS, where he went to rabbinical school. So there's been this Mussar rebirth, and you can go look on Wikipedia, because there's a whole thing about it on Wikipedia. But there's a whole bunch of books out there now, which is really, really fantastic. And especially that it is not just the domain of Orthodoxy any longer, that it really is in rabbinical schools, cross-denominational. You can find it a lot of different places. And not every Mussar school is the same. I mean, I have to say that I think the Center for Contemporary Mussar, which I am going to put in the chat right now. Wait a minute. You know what, Mark, I'm going to ask you to do that so I can just continue talking. If you can just either grab the, look up the website and pop it in if you don't mind. That would be great. Okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Dan, it looks like you have a question. Go for it. Unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. Do I understand correctly that the Mussar movement then was favoring ethical behavior over halakha, in the sense that they were saying things like, you don't have to worry about halakha and all the little details. The whole key is ethical life, and or other forms of social action and tikkun olam and this and that and the other. So I guess, in other words, were they anti other aspects of Judaism, and saying this is the one that really is most important?
That's a great question. No, I wouldn't say that it was anti-halakha at all, because you had yeshiva students studying it. I think, and I really appreciate your question so that I can refine what it is that I said. I think that Rabbi Salanter wanted his students and the people in the community of Lithuania to understand that ethical behavior was as important as halakha, as the rules, as the laws. And in fact, I will say from my own personal practice, and as someone who is an observant Jew, that I have found halakha to be really essential to my Mussar practice, because one of the things that we learn in Mussar is, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but really the crux of it is our obligation to the other. And I'm married to someone who's Orthodox, and he davens 3 times a day, and he kind of like was born into obligation. And as someone who didn't grow up observant, but is a observant conservative Jew, I never had that same sense of my obligation to obligation. And observing him, I'm like, yeah, because I really appreciate that from him, and have learned a lot from him, but also have learned a lot through my Mussar practice, how important to take obligation. It's not like, I don't think of it as something that you can, opt in or out of in a way. And we can define obligation in a very broad way. Like, I don't think there's one right way of like doing anything, right? But our obligation to each other is something that is, I think, quintessentially Jewish, but isn't quintessentially something that many of us were raised to integrate into our being. Okay, so I don't hope that helped a little bit. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what Mussar is. Like, I mean, I said that it means either discipline or instruction, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the word itself. So Mussar, there's three things I want to say about it. One is that it's a discipline. So it's a body of knowledge of classical and contemporary Jewish texts. It requires serious study and discussion. It's not a quick read that we might give to other books. And for instance, in the beginning of Mesilat Yesharim, Luzzatto talks about this is a text that you study, but study really means practice. So it's not an intellectual pursuit. And you kind of won't, you're not really in a Mussar practice if you're trying to get there intellectually. So it really is, it's a practice like, I don't know, have any of you ever done yoga before or something like that? Like, it's not like you do yoga once and you've gotten there, or if you're a meditator, right? It's like, it's a practice. It's just like, you're never there. You keep at it. Okay. So Mussar is a discipline that we incorporate into our daily life. It's a series of practices, and which is both individual and with somebody else, or in a group with other students. And that it is also to correct and improve ourselves to be the best person that we can be, and that we experience that joy because we are in service to the other. So those are a few ways to think about Mussar. So Rabbi Stone, my teacher, and actually my rabbi, as I mentioned, he's the impetus for the creator of the Center for Contemporary Mussar. And thank you, Reb Mark, for putting it in the chat so you can look at the site. There's all kinds of classes starting up. It's not the only place to study Mussar. It is the only place I personally would study Mussar. But there's lots of classes starting up. Okay, so he taught that we are obligated to bear the other as our burden. So I'm going to say that again. We are obligated to bear the other as our burden. And this phrase actually originates in the biblical commandment from Exodus 23 and Deuteronomy 22. So there's a story that that when someone has a donkey that has fallen under the weight of their load, we are commanded to see the fallen donkey as if it is our problem too, and that we help raise up this donkey, or we help carry the burden of this donkey. Okay, so we also have a phrase that you all are familiar with, to love your neighbor as yourself, from Rabbi Akiva. And when Rabbi Akiva shares this, which is really like nearly the center of the Torah, literally the center of the Torah, it comes from a collection of laws which turns our worldview into action. So like when we think about, what's it mean to love our neighbor as ourselves? It's not a saying, it's actually an action to do this. Rabbi Simcha Zissel, who is the lineage of, from Rabbi Stone, one of the Mussar teachers from the 1800s that I learned from Rabbi Stone via Simcha Zissel. He teaches that he also taught about learning to love our neighbor is to carry their burden. And so, what's it mean to carry the burden, or what's it mean to bear the burden, or do we actually ever know what someone else's burden is, and what does that have to do with us, and what does that have to do with Mussar? So when you wrote a few minutes ago, what brings you joy, how many of you wrote something like that had to do with yourself? Like, what brings me joy is, when I go on a bike ride, or I don't know, a something. Did anyone write that? Okay, so Joe, I'm going to pick on you because I saw your hand first. Can you unmute and just tell us what you shared?
Yeah, I didn't pick the bike ride. I wrote I like to play ball with my dog.
Also, oh, that's beautiful. Okay. Who else? Okay, great. I see a name. Alana.
A very thick mint chocolate chip chocolate milkshake.
Oh my God, that sounds so good. I mean, really good.
Joyful, total joy.
Total joyful. Okay. All right. Sandy.
We did an exercise like this way back when I was in your group. And that's still my capstone. What brings me joy, serving others brings me joy.
Okay. Now, do you remember back when we did this and what you wrote then?
Yes, that's what I wrote.
That's what you wrote. That's amazing because it is very rare for people beginning Mussar to write something like that. It's, it's right. And what other people wrote is right as well. Sometime because I'm a bike rider, but I'm also a longtime Mussarnik. I will still say, oh my gosh, when I get on my bike, like that's what brings me joy. But I also know that as a Mussarnik, the thing that's supposed to bring me joy is when I bear the burden of another. So we're just gonna talk about that for a little bit. Okay, so I think I'll start by first I want to say it's not always convenient to bear the other's burden. So, like for instance, one of the things that I took on when let's just say maybe it was 10 years into or 9 years into studying Mussar, I decided to go to morning minyan twice a week. And that's not always easy because it's early. And I don't love prayer. I'll just be honest. Like I go to shul every week. I don't love prayer, but I have always gone to shul. So I go to shul. But the reason I decided to pick that as a mitzvah that I wanted to do was it's not easy. So mitzvahs, you can write this down, are not supposed to always be easy, really. Like we think, maybe they're supposed to be convenient or easy, or sometimes they're not. Like going to a shiva house is never easy, but we know it's the right thing to do. But really, when the mitzvah is hard, that's a sign like, I'm going to do this because it's actually not easy because no one said it was supposed to be easy. Okay. In Mussar, we think of the, there's a few definitions that I want to talk about. One is, I want to talk about these terms, the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. So Yetzer Hara, which might be a word some or all of you are familiar with, has been defined as the evil inclination. And which doesn't sound so positive. But in Mussar, in our school of Mussar, we have really refined that to mean the ego. Because the Yetzer Hara gives us some really important information about ourselves. It's not bad at all. So next time someone says, oh, you're in your Yetzer Hara, just say, oh yeah, let me check in. What's going on for me? Okay. The Yetzer Tov, traditionally in our school of Mussar, it's been defined as the other. Okay. So Yetzer Tov could be, good, right? The good, but it's, or the other. So let's just hold on to those definitions for a moment. And I want to bring in the midot for a second. So midot are characteristic traits, as I mentioned a little earlier. And these traits serve to help us interrupt ourselves from ourselves. So there's 18 of them out of this book, Cheshbon HaNefesh, but there are many books of midot in the Jewish canon. We just focus in our School of Mussar on 18. If you look at Alan Marinis's book, Everyday Holiness, and it's a beautiful book. I really love that book. Some of the midot are a little different than the 18 from Cheshbon HaNefesh. So, if you have that book or you look at that book and you're confused by it, there's nothing wrong. It's just, there's so many lists to cull from. And so he culled, from some of the other lists. So the midot help us, and we're gonna do a meditation in a few minutes to really see what it is that we're talking about. But the thing about the Yetzer Hara to understand is that when we have fear about something, or we're worried about something, or we're feeling something in the pit of our stomach, or we're not breathing, that is the Yetzer Hara giving us a piece of information about ourselves. So that's where I would say it's really helpful to be curious. And if you're taking notes, I want you to write that word down, because being curious is so helpful, because then you can be inquisitive about yourself in a gentle way, in a really gentle way, as opposed to like maybe beating yourself up. Just being curious about why you're afraid of something. And it is all about fear. I can tell you that our Yetzer Hara comes up because we're afraid of something. And sometimes it's legitimate, and a lot of times it's not legitimate, but we are habitually afraid of something. And so that's the place where we go. We just close off our heart and we live in this fear. But the midot can help us interrupt ourselves from that. And that's the gift of them. And that's why, Reb Mark, when you really had this very good idea to bring Mussar into the month of Elul, that for your congregants here, it is the perfect time to embrace a new spiritual practice, or continue, if you've already studied or been studying, a new way of being in the world, because it is that helpful. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to talk about a few other words, and then I want to talk about a midah, and we're going to do a meditation. Now, I want to talk about the words kibush and tikkun. So kibush is when we don't say something that we want to say that's not very helpful. And I'm going to give you an example. So I don't always like how my husband dresses, I'll be honest. And do you think it's helpful if I say to him, okay, I really appreciate, who is it? Bina, you're laughing. I feel like you can relate to this or something. Yeah. So, and maybe other people have a version of this you can relate to. So sometimes I'll say, that shirt doesn't go with those pants. And is that helpful? Not really. And so when I started my Mussar practice, I was like, okay, I'm going to just like not say it. I'm going to just, every time I want to go there and dress the guy, and he didn't ask me to pick out his wardrobe, I'm going to like rein it in. That's kibush, when you rein it in and you don't even say it to begin with. Okay. So kibush is when you are aware that you're not saying something that you are dying to say that isn't helpful in any kind of way, and certainly doesn't raise your relationship up to the best that it can be. Tikkun is when it doesn't occur to you to say it at all, because you have been through this kibush practice enough times that you forget that you wanted to say it to begin with. And I will tell you, when I say that this definitely is a practice, it's not a one and done deal. It is like an everyday mindfulness kind of, oh yeah, oh my gosh, being a best friend here, because you can really, you're like, yeah, we're like in simpatico with each other around this. Yeah. So kibush is when you don't say something, and tikkun when it is, you've gotten there, like it doesn't occur to you anymore to say the thing that's not helpful. So I just want you to have those few words in your vocabulary. The other thing that I want to bring in here is the nefesh, which is one of the words for the soul. So there's a number of words for the soul. Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov are very binary terms, right? So you're either like in your hara, you know, you're like just all about yourself, or you're all about the other, and you can't get like from one place to the other. Like Pharaoh is a good example of this. Like eventually his heart got so hardened, even though God gave Pharaoh a lot of opportunities to let the Jews go, but eventually he was so biting, like his heart was so hardened, like he just could not let the people go. But we actually believe that you can go from being in your Yetzer Hara to being in your Yetzer Tov, because if you think about your soul as a permeable boundary, or like think about a window screen as opposed to a storm window. So in a window screen, the air can get in and out. And if you think about a time when your heart is really closed off, because you're like mad at somebody about something, who knows what it is, right? But you're like mad. But if you take some deep breaths and you actually look at the person in the eyes, and you can see that there's another human across from you or on the phone or wherever, then you can begin to soften your heart and you can begin to see the other. Like, we have so much power in our body to be able to do this. It's very empowering to realize that we have that control to bring the good, to do the good. So I wanted you to have those few vocabularies. Okay, there's a question. Devorah.
So I'm going back to when you said it's more important to be in service. I think that's what you said. So those are more highly valued than taking a bike ride. And I would like,
Go ahead.
So I would like to ask then how, I mean, what it says in the Torah is love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself, and you have to take care of yourself in order to be able to do those things. So your statement contradicts that from my understanding of what you said. Maybe that's not what you meant though.
I'm so glad you caught that, because it's a really important point, which is, yeah, I want to say a few things about that. One is that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of anyone else. And having said that, we can also use the excuse that we have to take care of ourselves so that we're not available to anybody else. And so it really is, it's an art and it's a science. The bike rides are really important, whatever the metaphor is for the bike ride, you know, for any of you, what it is that you do for self-care. But if that's all one does, then they're missing the joy in life of what it is to give to the other. I mean, that's really, like, we see God in the face of the other. And so that's, you know, that's what's happening here when we take care of ourselves. But like the metaphor that a lot of people like to use is the airplane, when they say, okay, put the mask over your child first, and then take care of yourself. And so, or no, put your own mask on first, and then, you know, put the mask on the child. So yeah, so you have to do that, but not to the extent of not seeing anybody else. So yeah, thank you for, did I clarify enough?
You did, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that there's so much to talk about tonight, and, you know, and we have, so yeah, so keep asking questions if something isn't clear. Okay. Any other questions before I talk about the midah that I want to focus on tonight? Okay, so I want to talk, oh, yes, I see Dan has his hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Is any of this Mussar history and all this connected or read through Kabbalah, Sfirot, and the other things like that, or is this just a whole other direction that doesn't go into mystical whatever?
Oh, great question. So one of the reasons why Luzzatto, who wrote Mesilat Yesharim, was so, why the rabbis were so threatened by him, was because he was a Kabbalist. And that I'm not a Kabbalist, but I love Kabbalah, like it's so interesting to me. And I have learned there in Mesilat Yesharim, there's definitely some stuff that's clearly Kabbalistic, but as I have been taught that some of it is in code, a bunch of his books are pure Kabbalist. There's a huge connection between Kabbalah and Mussar for sure. And with the Sfirot, I've looked at this a whole bunch. I mean, you can definitely make some connections with the Sphere Road and different Midot for sure. So there's a whole bunch of connections. Yes. And Tomer Devorah, which is a Mussar text, is also a Kabbalistic text. So,
But they
yes.
don't talk about it in terms of doing these good deeds and taking the burden from your neighbor as raising sparks or healing the universe or things like this, or Shekhinah. It's good in and of itself because it's a mitzvah or because it's just the way things should be done, or
Well,
do you have a question?
I love
Min,
this.
Min, if I can just circumvent Dan's question for a second, because
Sure.
I'm taking a look and I want to be mindful of time, and I know you want to get to experiential stuff. So if we want to continue this, after we're done, or there's some of these questions I can answer, or we can find out what the answers to these questions are. But they're terrific questions as always, Dan. Thank you.
So even though I won't kind of go into answering it because of the experiential piece, Dan, I do want to say one thing that's so important, which is that we actually never know what someone's burden is. So while we say, bear the other as a burden, the most that we can ever do is realize that there's someone there and they have a burden, and we never really necessarily know what it is. Like, for instance, if you're in a car and someone speeds by you and you have a choice whether you're going to have road rage yourself or cuss the person out, or you're going to think, oh, maybe someone is about to give birth and they need to get to the hospital, or someone is sick, or like, if you think for a minute that it's not about you in the car, look what they did to you. They made you like move out of the way, and you think someone's in a rush for a good reason. That's a way of calming yourself down, not making it about you, which sometimes we're wired to do that. And you can bear them a little bit because you're like, something's going on for them. Let me get out of the way. So yeah, we can never fix someone else's burden, usually, unfortunately. Maybe sometimes we can, but we can soften their load. And that's how the Midot help us. Okay, I want to talk about Seder. And I want to say at the end of this, or when this is over, Reb Mark is going to send you the list of 18 Midot from Cheshbon Nefesh with a definition of each of them. I'm just talking about Seder, which means order. So it's the very first one. And it's literally defined as all of your actions and possessions should be orderly, each and every one in a set place and a set time. Let your thoughts always be free to deal with that which lies ahead of you. Oh, good. And it's now in this particular one is in the chat, so you can read it or kind of paste it, or he's going to send it to you. But you get the idea about what Seder is, which of course is a word that we know from Passover, the Passover Seder. There's an order to the Seder. There's an order to how we are supposed to or can be in our lives. So it's a foundational midah. It's the first one in the book, Cheshbon HaNefesh. It enables us to create a time and space to have a Mussar practice or anything else we want to do with our life. It is, so for instance, it may be nice to have a very meticulous home, but if we are spending all our time cleaning it or organizing it, then we have to think to ourselves, what aren't we paying attention to, right? Like there might be other people around that need us, but we're so busy straightening up our home. So our goal is to be awake so that we can do what we need to do to get where we're going. So for instance, do we know where our car keys are so we can easily drive someplace? Do we leave enough time to get to an appointment? Do we have clean clothes to put on for work? When we are disorganized or disordered, either internally or externally, we are not available to ourselves or the other. So once we have incorporated Seder into our lives as a regular practice, we find that we have freed up time and space to be of service to others. And our orderly environment and schedule make it possible for us to recognize the burdens others have and to be available to help them fulfill their obligations. So the process of internalizing any midah and applying it in our lives is the foundation to the transformational work that we're seeking. So that's a little bit really like on 1 foot of what Seder is. What I want to do is and I think hopefully that you have enough information about it for this meditation. But if you have any questions about it, and I know I went at a pretty fast clip there, does anyone have any questions about Seder right this moment? Okay, so what I want you to do is I'm going to read you a meditation. And so what I want you to do is I want you to get comfortable. And if you are holding a pen, I want you to let it go. And there's nothing you need to do but close your eyes and ground yourself where you're seated. So if you're able to put your feet on the ground, that's great. To sit really in your chair so you can feel that the earth is holding you and that you are not only held by the earth, but you are literally held by the chair. And I want you to begin, well, hopefully you have been breathing, but I want you to continue breathing and really checking in with your breath so you can know that you're breathing, that you're mindfully just taking a deep breath in, a deep breath out, focusing purely on the breath. For those that are meditators, you know that the breath is what we have that brings us into the present moment. Just being aware of our breath. In, pausing, out. And there's always a second of a pause there. In and out. As you continue to breathe, feel your breath as a connection to the in and out breath of those closest to you. Continue to expand that feeling of connection to your expanding circle of relationships and outward into the world. As you breathe, so do the others around you. Feel your breath connecting you to all that is around you. Now see yourself from a distance. Look at yourself as though you are in a dream. As you approach yourself, visualize yourself in a situation with someone for whom you were not able to make time. This someone might be a partner, child, friend, work colleague, maybe someone else. It could be someone who sent you a text or an email, or someone who's reached out to you that you did not have time for. Now look at yourself. Think of how you schedule events in your life and ask yourself, how did my inability to plan my time well separate me from another? How well did I set my priorities? When you have finished viewing yourself, allow a vision of the other who was in the situation with you to enter your mind. See that person from a distance. Approach that person. Look at them. Look at them in their eyes. See them clearly. And ask yourself, how did the confusion and disorder in my life affect this person? Did I cause the other person harm because of my disorder? What was I afraid of? How could being more ordered bring more loving support to this person? Now continue to breathe in and out, being aware of your breath. And in the next few moments, when you are ready, bring your consciousness back to the present time and bring your focus back into our space together. So let's see, is everyone with us? Nearly. So what I want you to do now with your piece of paper and pencil is I want you to write a few things down, and this is just for yourself. So I want you to write down who the other was. You know, who was the other that you did not make time for? Whatever the time was that they needed. And this is just like a name of a person. And then I want you to write down, to the best of your ability, you may or may not know this, what was going on for them? Do you think at the time they reached out to you? What impact do you think your lack of Seder had on your ability to be available to them? The fourth question is, what did you learn about your Yetzer Hara? Or another way to think about this is, what were you afraid of that made you unavailable? And finally, how would you handle the situation differently next time? And when you have finished, just give me a thumbs up so I know. Okay, great. Okay, so I know that I said you're only doing this for yourself, and I actually did mean that, but I wonder who, without, and you don't have to go into any detail at all, because details are the story. And there's always like a story related to a situation that comes up. But really in Mussar, what you want to get to is really dropping the story and getting to the essence of, can you be available to this person or not? Like sometimes there's a real legitimate reason why you can't be available, and you're discerning if it's legitimate or not. And that is a long-term spiritual practice, that discernment. So I wonder, who wants to share? Like either what came up for them, or what their takeaway is. Like if you had an aha moment from this meditation and what it is you jotted down. Okay, I saw Barb first, so if you, yeah, thanks.
Okay, hi. So my situation was someone from one of my communities reached out and said, you know, "Oh, we have an urgent situation. We're needing someone to take on a task. Can people respond?" And I just didn't. I was feeling overwhelmed and decided, oh, I don't know if I can help in this situation. I feel overwhelmed just thinking about it. And the impact, I think, would be that they would be more stressed. Perhaps others did not respond. I know many people in the community are busy. So instead, I had a lovely conversation with another friend, and I didn't respond yet. So to do it differently, I think I would just send a brief note and say, you know, look, can we talk a little bit about it? I would like to contribute something. Yeah, so that's basically it.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay. Who would like to share next? Bina, go ahead.
You know, just one of those things that happens a lot sometimes when you have a messy house. I had a neighbor who wanted me to meet somebody who was at her house, who was in town, and my house was messy. And so I said, well, maybe not today. And then by the time I got back to her the next day to say, I'm ready, of course, the person had left town, and I felt terrible that I had let mess. It wasn't that bad, but to me, I was afraid I would be judged about my messy house. So I don't like to have a messy house. So I felt silly afterwards. Like, what a stupid reason not to have somebody in. Oh, well.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, what a great aha for you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Miera.
I'm in a group, and people share a lot about what they need and what, you know, a lot about their personal story. And there was a woman that I knew, and I have less patience with her than with some other people. She tends to go on and on. She happens to be kind of on the needy side. And I kind of said, all right, I'll reach out to you offline so that, you know, but I never did because I didn't want to get sucked in. I felt like it would be hard for me, and it would be, then I might be opening the door to having this needy person rely on me. And so the upshot of it was that as long as I have strong boundaries, I can give. So it's not that I shouldn't give at all, but that I should be clear about my boundaries so that I don't feel that I'm getting, you know, that I'm not taking advantage of, or that I don't feel that I can give up to what I feel comfortable giving. That was what I came up with.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, Sheila.
Okay. I have a neighbor among many, and every time we get into a more than superficial conversation, for some reason, it always ends with her complaining about people being the cause of all the problems in our country because they're from another country. And I really, you know, I just felt like I can't seem to find the cutoff. And I don't, you know, I prefer not to get as close. But I found out that there had been a death in her family, and I sent her a note and put some snacks outside for her, she in a bag, and she wrote back and was very appreciative and had learned that I had been ill, and she started to ask me, she asked me some questions, and I meant to write back and say, yeah, it was a total surprise what happened, but I haven't, and I didn't. And, as the person, not to, but as I've just heard with someone else here, it's as if I want to set a firm boundary in order to communicate with her, but I, I, I don't know that that would even be possible. This is someone who, um, uh, she she thinks it's not necessary to have, to do a COVID shot, but won't wear a mask. And she and another neighbor caused some issues here. It's sometimes when she looks at me, I've told other people this, and they said, well, she'll look at me, and then I don't know. I thought, well, maybe she's hard of hearing. She's not that old. Maybe she's hard of hearing because she will look at me in the oddest way. And so I also find that I say less. And one explanation to me was, well, maybe she's expecting horns to come out of your head because you're Jewish. And I thought, oh God, maybe in this case, distance is the most comfortable thing, and getting too close is not a good idea. So I know that I've known her for years, and I don't feel safe. I think that's part of it. I don't feel safe unless I keep it extremely superficial. I'm sorry I didn't write back, and I will still send a note, which I've been thinking about, saying, sorry, I didn't get back to you. Yeah, I did find that as a surprise, but then she'll want to engage in me. And it's uncomfortable. And I think that's the thing. I guess one of my questions for Mussar is, where do you draw the line? And I think about, with Hashem, you can ask for forgiveness for a sin, but how many, if you did that same sin every year after year after year, this is not going to confession and saying, okay, it's absolved. I really I don't want to be mean to anyone, but by the same token, I'm not comfortable in that situation because I just don't know what she's going to say next. And it makes me feel really bad when she makes those comments. I know it's not my place she's entitled to her thinking, and she's not going to change, but is that how, and I know that's not what we're preaching here, but is that how I really want to spend my time? Or can I just be nice at a distance? That's what I have to say.
Okay, so Sheila, you raised actually, I don't know if anyone else can relate to what you said, but I can really relate to things that you brought up that are very challenging, that in the 3 minutes we have left, I can't address all of them, but I will say this, which is it is definitely hard to be around with people that, for some people, it is hard to be around people when they don't know, we're not simpatico around our belief systems. One of the things that Mussar challenges us to do is to be able to be around people that we don't necessarily agree with, because we're challenged to bear the other. But having said that, sometimes we can do that, and sometimes we can't do that, and sometimes we can do that in January, and sometimes we can't do it in February. And it really varies. Also, some people can do that after like 5 years of Mussar, and sometimes after 5 years of Mussar, someone will say, you know what, I can't do it, and I don't want to do it. So I don't have I can't fix it or answer your question. I just feel like raises a lot of really good questions. And I'm feeling like you just took a deep breath. Like I can like feel the anxiety around it because I can tell like you're a nice person and you want to be a good person. And not connecting with someone doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't. You're still a good person. So one of the main things I want to close with this by saying a couple things that kind of as your homework. Even though I won't see you, you're going to have some other Mussar teachers in the coming weeks. And I'm sure you're going to learn a lot from them. But one of the things that I have learned, and I learn over and over again in Mussar, is when I think I know the answer for somebody else. And so, and I feel like I was raised in a culture where I either am supposed to be able to fix it for somebody else, or I want to fix it for somebody else, or I think I know better than somebody else. And that is our Yetzer Hara. That's our ego, when we think we know better than somebody else. So I want to give you all the homework assignment to pay attention to that. During the month of Elul, besides Seder, because I just gave you the Midah of Seder, which is a beginning, not an end, but paying attention to your Seder and the impact it has on others. But also pay attention to how often you want to give advice to somebody, how often you might interrupt a conversation to jump in to say, oh, this A, B, and C happened to me. Let me tell you how I handled it. When it's not about you, it's about the person who's talking to you. Can you stay present with the other person without making it about yourself? Can you stay present with the other person and say back to them what you heard them say to you, as opposed to trying to fix it for them? Because then you're being present to the other. And that is a beautiful way of bearing the other. Simply being there and being present for them without fixing it, without advice, unless you say to them, do you want feedback or do you want some advice on this? I'm happy to listen, just listen to you. So anyway, we're out of time.
Never out of time. Never out of time.
Yeah, it's my favorite topic, Mussar. So thank you for inviting me in.
Thank you. Thank you so much, man. There's a couple of things I want to raise up before we leave. First of all, is what a beautiful door you've opened for us to these next few weeks of Mussar. You laid the groundwork and exactly the way that I was hoping. There was something when you were talking about the Yetzer Hara before and how it has a way of bringing our attention to things that are uncomfortable, perhaps sometimes. It reminds me in my meditation practice how in mindfulness where we are encouraged to bring curiosity, and you use that word, bring curiosity to everything, and in doing so without judgment and showing compassion, that the heart softens, and then it's more possible to be there. Devorah, you raised up how can we be there for someone else if we're not there for ourselves? So that's part of the self-care work as well. And in Hebrew, the question is mazeh, like what is this? To stop and breathe and to look with curiosity at what is happening in this moment without judging the moment, and while schlepping the story, when you also talked about that too, man, without schlepping the story with us, but treating each moment anew with each cleansing breath and awakening to each of those moments. So thank you. I'm now super excited for the next 3 weeks. Mussar, next week, Alana and Reb Sandy are going to be leading us through, and tell your friends how this is to watch the video and then join us next week. I would like to close this evening with my musical setting for Psalm 27, which of course is the psalm for Elul all the way through Sukkot and Simchat Torah. Here are the lyrics. Achat sha'alti me'ed Adonai Ota, ota, avakesh. One thing I ask of you, my holy friend. One thing I ask of you, my holy friend, to sit in your presence all the days of my life, to sit in your presence all the days of my life. Shifti b'veit Adonai kol yamei chayai. Shifti b'veit Adonai kol yamei chayai. Ay, 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 la, la, ay, da, da. Ay, 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 ay.